Good evening and happy Halloween. Welcome to the final forum in a series of forums with the candidates for office for November 7th that is being produced by Q Community College and done in conjunction with the Citizen, our sponsor. Shown on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, and ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, and played also on the college's radio station, Win 89. We're delighted to have you join us tonight. I'm your moderator, Guy Cosentino. On November 7th, voters in the city of Auburn will vote for 2 members of the Auburn City Council to serve a 4-year term. This year, Cuddy and Debby McCormick are seeking second terms and are being challenged by John Camardo, who served on the City Council from 2012 to 2015, and newcomer Adam Miller. The position of a member of the City Council is a part-time job. It pays just a hair over $9,000 per year, and it does allow incumbents to be eligible for health benefits. The 5 members of the current City Council are all registered Democrats. Representing the press today is a familiar face and someone who's been with us for the last 10 years, and we're delighted he's done all 5 of this fall. Is Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen. He'll be asking the questions of the candidates. Prior to taping of the show, the candidates drew lots to see what order they would be giving their 2-minute opening statements. The order will be reversed at the end of the forum for the closing statements. Just a programming note, while we had originally advertised that this was going to be just an hour forum, the candidates have agreed to go roughly a little bit longer than that. So we'll go most likely an hour and 20, hour and 30 minutes on this. And our candidates are in the order of where they're going to make their opening statements. The first candidate who you'll be hearing from, and then we'll introduce them all and then have them make their comments, is Cuddy, who is on the Democratic Working Families Parties and Auburn First line. John Camardo, who is on the Republican, Conservative, and Independent line. Adam Miller, who is on the Republican and Independent line. And Debby McCormick, who is on the Democratic Working Families and Auburn First Party. Welcome all. We're delighted to have you all here. Mr. Cuddy, you're going to have 2 minutes. You may start any time.
Great. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Jeremy. And I'd like to thank the Q Community College and the Citizen for hosting this televised event. I'm running for re-election because I believe in public service. I come from a family that values public service. My mother was a public school teacher. My father was a United States Marine. And my uncle was a 2-term Auburn City Councilor. I've had the honor and privilege to serve you, the people of Auburn, for the last 4 years. I want to continue to serve the constituents because there is more work to do, to follow through in what I've begun the first term. When I ran 4 years ago, the council, whose majority undermined the idea of public service, besieged the city. They dismantled the basic services that a city like Auburn needs to function. There was no city comptroller to mind the finances of the city. Firefighters were needlessly laid off, and other departments were being cut to subsidize the huge losses incurred by the landfill gas project. Along with these structural problems, the tone of City Hall echoed a failing city. If one listened close to some of the city councilors 4 years ago, one could almost hear closed for business. This shouldn't be the mantra for the city that I know and love. I champion Auburn, and I vowed to fix the problems that were onset by the majority of council 4 years ago. After I was sworn into office, I worked with Councilor McCormick and Mayor Quill to fix the city that lay broken. After 4 years, we see a city beginning to sprout up. Businesses like Tessie, Courier, and Nucor investing millions of dollars to expand. Prison City and Good Shepherd breweries are among the local attractions. Auburn is indeed open for business. This did not happen by accident. It was accomplished by allowing the various institutions that were designed to bring business to our city to do their job. I will continue to champion this city and help it thrive in the 21st century.
Thank you, Mr. Cuddy. We'll now hear from John Camardo, who's on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence line. Mr. Camardo, welcome.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this evening. We're facing a very important decision to make on November the 7th. We can either make a decision to go down the road of high taxes, fees, a city government that doesn't listen to you, that's completely closed to public opinion, a city government that completely ignored us with the selection of the city manager, city clerk, and on and on and on, the selection of the welcoming center in downtown Auburn that was totally, people were not listened to. I want to bring you down another path, a path of trying to bring transparency back to City Hall, to have an outside voice, You know, it's not good that any political party has complete control of city government. I want to bring your voice back to City Hall. I want to open the doors to City Hall. I want to have job creation, something that's been ignored over the last 2 years. I think it's very important that we start expanding the tax base so we can bring people back to Auburn. People are not leaving. I have an example. My two oldest boys left the area because one's an engineer and one's a journalist. And they left the area because there's no opportunities. Over the last couple of months, I've been walking the streets. Our neighborhoods are in disrepair. We need immediate attention to our roads. Our roads are crumbling. We need attention to our water. These are the things that are important. We got to start expanding the tax base so the burden's not put on such a small number of people, but it can be broadened. We see progress in the city, but we can build much more upon that, especially in the downtown area. But unfortunately, the downtown area doesn't start and begin at the city limits. We've got neighborhoods to bring into that fold. So it's very important that we have somebody on the city council that will listen to you and to listen to your needs and try to bring tax relief so that you can help your families grow and prosper in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Camardo. We'll now hear from Adam Miller, who's on the Republican and Independence Party line. Mr. Miller, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This election is going to be one of great importance for our city. We have, as Mr. Camardo said, two paths to choose from. We have a city government that doesn't want to listen, or will only partially listen to us. And I love the city of Auburn, and I want to continue to live here, raise my family here, but it gets harder and harder every day. And that's why I wanted to get into the race, that I wanted to try to make a difference in the city that I love. It's not the city that I grew up in, and I want to bring it back to some of its former glory. I know that from walking the streets, talking to people, we've heard many people complaining about the exact same things, and it's just not being represented properly or accurately, not being listened to, the overtaxation, the unanswered for spending of our taxpayer dollars. There's no real change in our city streets. There's slight improvement in our drinking water. There are things that need to be addressed now, and there's things that need to be set aside for later. And we need to bring priority to our city government and projects that we have. We need to find out what is a need and what is a want. It's fun to sit back and complain about everything, but we have to get into the game. We have to get involved, and we have to make a difference in our community. And that's what I'm trying to do in running for a seat on the Auburn City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. We'll now hear from Debby McCormick, who is on the Democratic Working Families Party and Auburn First Party. Counselor, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Guy and Jeremy. And I want to thank Cuddy Community College for providing this forum and for the Citizen for sponsoring this. I'm honored to have been able to serve my hometown as city councilor for the last 4 years. We are heading in the right direction, and I want to stay for another term as your city councilor to help keep us on track. Downtown Auburn is a great example. Downtown is experiencing a renaissance. I serve on the Auburn Downtown Business Improvement Board, and it has been exciting to see downtown Auburn become the hub of year-round activity that it has become. Entertainment, dining, retail, and special events have made Auburn a popular destination for residents and visitors. Over 60% of the visitors to downtown Auburn are from out of town. While we have accomplished a lot, we still face challenges. A very significant challenge is the threat to Owasco Lake. Harmful algal blooms have put our lake and our drinking water at risk. It's a challenge that requires teamwork, cooperation, and leadership. Along with the dedicated professionals at City Hall, the county staff, we work side by side with our local and state officials to do the work necessary to protect our lake and our drinking water. 4 years ago, when I decided to run for city council, it was because Auburn was at a crossroad. The majority of council at the time were taking us in the wrong direction. Under the premise of looking out for the taxpayer, my predecessors randomly cut critical public services, mismanaged city finance and operations, which ultimately cost city taxpayers even more. These decisions were damaging to our public safety. We fixed it. When Councilor Cuddy and I took office, things were broken. We rehired 10 firefighters and restored public safety. We've hired a city comptroller and stabilized our city finance. As a matter of fact, we've improved city finance. I'm proud of where Auburn is today. We're seeing progress like we haven't seen in a long time. I do not want to see Auburn go backwards. That's why I'm here today, and I'm asking here for your vote on Election Day.
Thank you, Councilor. We'll now have questions from Mr. Boyer. He can ask of all of you or any of you individually. He's done both in the last 4 forums. So, Mr. Boyer, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for coming here today and answering some questions. We'll try to get through as much as we can. And a lot of issues facing the city, so we'll do our best. Certainly, one of the biggest is the water issue. The Owasco Lake's quality has been compromised over the last several years, and it showed up in last year in the treated drinking water with the algae toxins, and now we've been dealing with that issue. I'm going to ask you two questions related to that. One has to do with the short-term issue of the water filtration improvements that were put in this year to try to deal with the raw water having algae toxins in it. Money was secured from the state to get that done, but we have to come up and evaluate that pretty soon and decide, was that the best approach, and should we continue with this? So that's my first question, is basically on the short-term water filtration issue. Has that been a success, and should we continue with this program, or are there other measures we should take in terms of the short-term issue?
Okay, Mr. Cuddy, you have 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, yes, I agree it is a success. We needed an immediate solution to the problem of our drinking water, and filtration was the first thing to guarantee the people of Auburn that we can provide them safe drinking water. So the council acted and asked the state government to come through with funding for both Owasco and Auburn to update their filtration plants. So that's very important. Obviously, the long-term issue is going to take more pressure on the state for a comprehensive plan. But one thing I will say is that that is what we need. We need to utilize all resources to get the funds we need to assure safe drinking water. My former colleague, Mr. Camardo, when I first started council, we had an opportunity to get 0% financing for our infrastructure. And he decided that it would be better to take money out of our own pocket to do that. And a $3.4 million investment in our infrastructure, it's better off that we would have bonded over 20 years, because we don't want to put take money out of our general fund to do that. So one thing that is important is that you need to make sound financial decisions. And the other thing that needs to happen, we need to keep our infrastructure affordable. And to do that, we need to make sure that we are looking for every opportunity through the state, and to make sure that our infrastructure, water and otherwise, is funded, and so that we can provide the best service for the people of Auburn.
Thank you, Mr. Cuddy. Mr. Camardo, on this issue of short-term.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's important that one of our greatest assets is our drinking water, is the Owasco Lake, not only for drinking water, but our tourism that we have here. But we have to take a step back, and I think the Citizen wrote a good editorial a couple weeks ago. The responsibility belongs to the City Council. New York State public health law states that under Section 114, City Council in the town of Owasco have jurisdiction over the lake. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the leadership on the council to address the problems that we're facing on the lake. Number one, where we're asking state and federal officials to come in and provide the money to address these problems. Number two is the council's responsible, not the committees that are set up. I know a lot of these committees have good intentions, they're very helpful, but the responsibility belongs to the council, and that's something that I think has been shrugged off. It's important that we get the state to look at a waterway, a pipeline from Moravia to our sewage treatment plant. So the Cuga Correctional Facility and the town or the village of Moravia and Groton are not dumping into the Owasco Lake. A lot of these homes that have septic tanks can plug into that system and that line that comes directly to Auburn. I think we need to do a better job of what kind of vegetation is planted along the lake. We need to have retention ponds so we don't have mass of amounts of water flowing into the lake and causing problems, but the leadership starts with the council, whether it's financial, whether it's making decisions to protect our watershed, and that's something that's been lacking. And hopefully when I'm elected, we can bring that leadership back to the council, have a dialogue with our federal, state officials so that funding's made available to address these problems. Thank you very much.
Mr. Miller, you'll have 2 minutes.
On the short-term end of it, I think we're headed in the right direction with the upgrades that were done through the money that was given to us by the governor, and the pre-filtration system that's out at the lake now. I just read in the Citizen today that they were collecting water and doing studies, and as of right now, things look like that this summer has been, it's definitely been better than it was last summer. And it looks like we're headed in the right direction. So in the short term, I think we have the right idea, we're doing the right things. Long term is another story. That's something that we have to look at periodically. We have to get more, everyone has the good ideas to go to try to solve the problem, but we need to try to implement some of them and see, reach out to some of our federal organizations, federal representatives, state representatives, and ask for their help as well. But as far as the short term goes, I do believe that we are going in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Councilor McCormick.
Thank you. I find it interesting that Mr. Camardo said that the city council needs to be the leaders on protecting the lake. One of the interesting things is when I decided to run for council at the time, I was city clerk. And it always intrigued me that there was no discussion of the lake. There was no, if you didn't know any better, you didn't even realize the city had anything to do with the Owasco Lake. One of my first things I wanted to do was become more involved with the Owasco Lake, and I was appointed to the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council and the inspection program. I've been on it for 4 years. I've gotten to know the people in the county planning department that are involved in working on protecting the watershed, protecting the lake. Through the last 2 years, I've gotten to know the people at the DEC that are helping us, have come forward. They were helping us all along, but they've even ramped it up even more. I think the city, yes, we are responsible, just like the towns that live around, that are situated around the lake, that are in the watershed, in the county. I think we're all responsible for taking care of the lake. There's no one person. And to put the burden on city taxpayers alone, I think would be an injustice. It's not just our problem, it's everyone's problem. I think we're doing everything because the relationships we've built with our government in Albany, our friends at the county office building, in the planning department. We're building relationships with the towns in the watershed, which are very important to protecting the lake. I think you can't do things, you can't accomplish anything by making enemies. You need to make friends and work together.
Thank you, Councilor McCormick. Mr. Cuddy, you have 1 minute.
I agree with Councilor McCormick 100%. I remember when I was running for council and there was a lot of talk regarding creating a water authority in which there would be cooperation between towns and the city and so on. And I know as a city councilor how responsible we are for our drinking water. But I will say this, when I was going to council meetings at that time, when I was not on council, and I saw how the council willfully sat back and watched those talks crumble. That's not coordination. That's not building relationships with towns. That's failing. It was broken. And I say the efforts that we've made over the last year during this crisis has begun to cooperate. We've begun to cooperate with city and the county and the state and federal to deal with a very serious issue.
Mr. Camardo, you'll have a minute as well.
The cooperation between the city and the county has been lacking over the last at least 2 years. I just want to remind Mr. Cuddy and Ms. McCormick one thing. Under the city charter, the city has the authority to operate and regulate the water systems in the city. So those things should have been looked at before any discussion started to have a county-wide water authority, because the city charter would have had to been changed. Now, unfortunately, you have a city government that doesn't really read the charter and understand the charter. And the second thing is, I would really recommend that you read New York State public health law about the authorities that lie with the with city council. City Council and the Town Council of Owasco are the lead agencies in protecting and inspecting the water authority or the watershed of Owasco Lake, and that's important. That's important to understand. That's important that as we as elected officials understand what the charter says and what the laws are that govern our governments, so that we can provide you the services that you have voted to have. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camardo. Okay. Mr. Boyer.
Well, just moving into the little more discussion on the long range issue of the lake, of the water quality in the lake itself, and maybe we can phrase this in a way that we start with Ms. McCormick and Councilor Cuddy, because the way I'm going to phrase this kind of involves those two first, and then the other two can jump in. But you've been on the Watershed Management Council, and that agency has moved forward in implementing a 9-element watershed restoration plan. At the same time, Councilor Cuddy has been on with a group called Save Owasco Now that is pushing for a total maximum daily load. I think I'm getting that acronym correct.
Yes.
And not necessarily agreeing that 9-element is going to be an effective route. You're not necessarily agreeing TMDL is an effective route. So can you sort of explain why you're coming at where you're coming from, and then tell people out there trying to figure out what is the right path for us to go to, why they should go with what you're saying?
So is this for all the candidates?
So I think I'd like to start with Ms. McCormick,
Okay.
then Mr. Cuddy, and then
Then we'll get back
and then
into
if
rotation. Okay.
if Mr. Ricardo and Mr. Miller want to weigh in on their preference
But
for
we'll
one
give
of
them
those.
2 minutes for this as
Yeah,
well. Okay.
yeah.
Councilor McCormick, you have 2 minutes on this issue.
Thank you. It's true. Councilor Cuddy does feel that the TMDL is the better route to take. And the 9-element plan is something that the Watershed Management Council has already implemented. And based on what the experts, the DEC and the consultants that we've worked with have told us and explained, that the 9-element is the best way to go. And I have total faith in what they say. It's going to, it's already started, whereas the details and the way to get a TMDL going takes a lot longer. We are right now in the process of testing the water and getting the steps through the steps to implement the 9-element plan. It's not that the TMDL is the wrong plan, or that the 9-element is the better plan. They will both accomplish the same thing. It's just that they're just a little bit different. They'll accomplish the same thing, but the way they're done is different. I've been on the committee that and worked with the people at the county, and the 9-element plan seems like, based on what I know, is the best way to go as far as the city goes. And every lake is different. Owasco Lake is surrounded by farmland, and so that makes it more difficult to tie down a point source of the pollution that comes into the lake. So the 9-element plan is supposed to be better at addressing that. So that's my end of it.
Mr. Cuddy, the differences?
Yes. So the total maximum daily load is slight different from the 9-element plan, because the TMDL, total maximum daily load, is basically comes from the Clean Water Act, and what it is it is from the EPA. And the EPA basically has states register lakes on what is called it's on a list, the 303D list. And what that means is that the lakes that are on that list, which Owasco Lake is on that list, the impairment needs to be remedied. And the remedy is a TMDL. So the reason why I choose the TMDL is that there is regulatory oversight, and it has the backing of the EPA. So it's statutory, and once a TMDL is granted, there is a solution to a problem, and it is in sight. The 9-element plan is completely voluntary. Now, the work that is being done on the 9-element plan is useful towards a TMDL. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can begin a 9-element plan, and that information, that data, can be used for a TMDL. So I'm glad something is happening. But what we need, and as I said earlier, we need a comprehensive plan. This is not something that the city of Auburn can do alone. We need to work together especially with the state. This is an issue that affects us. We need a comprehensive plan, and the TMDL is that comprehensive plan. The DEC, the governor in particular, has the power to make that happen, especially as this harmful algal bloom is threatening not only Owasco Lake, but all of the Finger Lakes. But it is Owasco Lake that hit us worse the first.
Thank you, Mr. Cuddy. Mr. Camardo, you have 2 minutes on the 2 plans.
A lot of talk, unfortunately. Everybody has good intentions, folks, on these committees, but some of these committee recommendations they wouldn't be recognized until 2023. We've got to have action now, and the councilors got to understand that the responsibility lies with the city council. They're the ones that have the authority to inspect and to have maintenance over the watershed. They've got to start looking at that responsibility they have, understand the laws that are on the books now. But most importantly, we've got to work with our partners. We got to work with the farmers. We got to work with people who surround the watershed and might be continuing to commit to that kind of pollution that's going into the lake. So we got to work with these people. But most importantly, we got to work with our state and federal officials to make sure that we have the funding available to identify the problem immediately and to find a solution. These problems can't be allowed to go out to 2023. They've got to happen immediately. We're talking about our drinking water. We're talking about the health and welfare of our tourism destination that we have on the lake. So we hear a lot about talks. We hear a lot about studies. I could take you on the 3rd floor of the City Hall where it's loaded with studies. Unfortunately, millions of dollars spent on taxpayers' funds on studies, but it's time to do something. That's why we need a city council. We need people on the council that can go out and make these things happen. And I'm very confident that I can make these things happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camardo. Mr. Miller, you'll have 2 minutes on the 2 different versions.
As was mentioned, the final authority should be the city council, the town council of Owasco on the matters of the lake. I don't see where there's anything wrong with reaching out to surrounding communities and asking for help and input, as they do benefit from our drinking supply as well. We should have more input and more ideas coming in. And there's nothing wrong with working with these other organizations or groups and getting ideas, working in partnership with them. But the final authority on it should be those 2 governing bodies that is laid out in the charter and in the state law. And like I said before, we should be reaching out to the state, to the federal government, to organizations and agencies for the funding, for the resources, to maintain the changes that have been made thus far, and to possibly implement more changes in the future as we might see more problems. As I mentioned in the last debate, we've been struggling with issues with our drinking water for a long time, and it's sad that we aren't farther along in the solution than we are. We should have a better idea, a better handle of things, and be sharing those solutions with the surrounding areas that are now suffering with the same problems that we are. So reaching out and asking for help from other communities, other surrounding areas, having them in cooperation with us, but having us be the final authority on it, and to stay in accordance with the charter and the law, I think is the best way to go.
Mr. Cuddy, you'll get 1 minute.
I just need to say a couple things. The city council can only make things happen by working with people. And what I see happening is that Debby McCormick, Councilor McCormick, and myself are not just meeting, we are actually making progress. We are creating policy. We're not talking about making policy. As you know, all you need to do is look in the paper and see what is happening with our efforts and how we can deliver. But if you think that a record of grand ideas but no follow through is going to work for you, it's not going to help this lake. We can say we have these grandiose ideas of like the city of Auburn has such and such an authority, but you need somebody that's going to be able to work with the state and federal government and the county to actually follow through and actually remedy this issue.
Mr. Camardo, you'll get a minute, and then Councilor
Mr. Cuddy,
McCormick.
it's not such and such, it's the state law, and we need to follow the state law. We need to follow the charter of the city of Auburn. Those are the laws on the books that we need to follow as elected officials. And we can work with everybody and talk about policy, but it's up to the city council to follow through and make sure that the policies of the state law are being followed through. And that's the inspection, and that's the maintenance of the watershed that we have as a city. We have the authority, not we, but the city council has that authority. And it's not about talking about policy with somebody else. It's reading the law and following the law, something that the city council needs to do and follow through on that. It's very important. These things need to happen right away, not down the road, not talking with everybody, but we need to have action. It's a call to action. It's probably one of the most important issues that the city's facing right now is our drinking water. When you don't have drinking water, how do you attract anybody? How do you attract tourism? How do you attract jobs? How do you attract anything? It's very important that the city council takes the lead, and we have the leadership on the council to follow through on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camardo. Councilor McCormick, you get 1 minute.
Thank you. Again, it's always been very important to protect our lake and our watershed. And it's interesting that today is the day that you are talking about that, Mr. Camardo, is it being so urgent, when again, 4 years ago, there was no interest in the Watershed Committee. This has been in place since 2008, and we do know what the charter says. The town of Owasco and the city of Auburn are the voting members of the Owasco Watershed Inspection Program. The county as a representative as well, because of their support that they give, but Supervisor Ed Wagner and myself are the voting members of the Watershed Inspection Program. We meet twice a month. We've been doing that. We're working with a lot of different people. It's not a simple problem. It's 209 square miles of watershed that you have to look at and analyze and work with. And you need to work with everyone to do it, even though it's everyone's responsibility. Thank you.
Mr. Boyer.
All right, we could talk about the lake for 90 minutes, of course, so I'm going to try to get to a few other areas. They're all important. One that's generated a lot of discussion in the city this year, I think it was alluded to in one of the opening statements, is the Welcome Center project. Some people have criticized the selection of the parking lot between City Hall and the YMCA as the site for that, and pointing to the heavy use that it currently gets, especially at certain times of the day. So my question, and I think we'll start with Councilor McCormick and work back, so they can sort of, as the incumbents, explain the decision, and then hear from the other two as far as their thoughts on it. But the question is, why did the council go for this choice, and what kind of effort was made ahead of time to get public input before making the choice?
So what we'll do is Councilor McCormick, Councilor Cuddy, Mr. Miller, Mr. Camardo.
Gotcha.
And then maybe we'll get back to a rhythm.
I'm throwing it off today.
You are, it's all right.
Well, the Equal Rights Heritage Tourism Center is to me, it's a sign that the governor saw Auburn as to be part of what he has as a bigger plan. It's a statewide plan to connect all the different historic places in the state that have to do with equal rights. Seneca Falls, the city of Auburn, and all around, they're connected together, and he's willing to invest $10 million in the city to make this building happen. All we needed to do was to have the property, provide the land to do it. And we've provided the parking lot across the street from City Hall. We had studies done, we had public meetings, we met with all the neighbors, the stakeholders that are contingent or adjacent to the area that we're going to build it in. We've done everything possible that we could do to make things work for everyone that's involved. This is a project that's going to bring 100 jobs to construction jobs to the city. It's going to attract, our foundation now for our economic growth is tourism. This is going to be a magnet for growth in tourism. And I think it's fantastic that we've had this investment in Auburn. We'll have the jobs, the construction jobs to go with it, and I think it's going to spiral, and we'll be able to build on that if we make the right choices.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Cuddy, on the choice of the Visitor Center across from City Hall.
4 years ago, the majority of council was very skeptical of a tourist economy. And we saw that with the treatment of the theater project, in which the council sat back idly while a viable initiative like this theater was stopped from happening. So here we are 4 years later with a great opportunity. And what we need at this point in time is to understand that the Cuddy County Office of Tourism basically said that there was $100 million of revenue brought into this county. I mean, that's a number. And the tourist economy does bring jobs. And this Welcome Center, this summer alone, will have 100 construction jobs. But long term, it's going to be another reason for people to visit Auburn beside the Harriet Tubman National Park, besides our great restaurants. The one thing that we need to do is understand is that when one part of our city is succeeding, wherever it is, it's an opportunity for all parts of our city to succeed, because that is income that comes into our city through sales tax. It gives us pride in our community, and you could feel it. Going door to door, there's so many people that do tell us, Debby and myself, how proud they are of Auburn, how proud they're doing. And I will say this, is that there are more younger people coming to Auburn. There are more people my age with families looking for houses. So this Welcome Center is a symptom. It was a $10 million investment into our downtown. It is not taxpayer money. It was from a settlement from banks. So finally, the people of Auburn are benefiting from a project from the state like this for tourism.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Mr. I'm going to go back and forth, then we'll...
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
I would have to agree with Councilor Cuddy when he said that the people of Auburn are proud to live in the city of Auburn. However, both Councilor McCormick and Councilor Cuddy have forgotten one thing in the selection of that parking lot, and that was listening to the people of Auburn. They are proud of Auburn, and they do want a visitor center, but they want that parking lot to be left alone. As the number one complaint that I hear from people going door to door is, why does it have to be in that parking lot? The second complaint is the design aspect of it. It doesn't match the neighborhood that they want to put it in. Those two things combined, and well, three things with not listening to the people, it should be a red flag for the city council. We're going to get the $10 million from the state to work on this visitor center. There's other locations that we could look at to build the visitor center or invest in remodeling vacant properties in the center of downtown. There are a number of different property selections in and around the area that we could build onto or renovate or redo. But it's simply listening to the voice of the people. They want a visitor center. They don't want it in that parking lot. And yeah, I understand that it's going to bring 100 construction jobs, but if we build in that parking lot, it's going to severely hurt the YMCA. Are we willing to sacrifice the jobs that will be taken away from the YMCA for temporary construction jobs? That's something that we should really consider in making this decision as well. The simple answer to this problem is move the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Camardo, you have 2 minutes on this subject.
Yes, it's funny. Mr. Cuddy says that I don't want to see progress in downtown. Of the four of us here, I have a large investment in downtown Auburn, so I love to see progress in downtown. I started progress in downtown in 1995 when I invested in a building downtown. So for my opponents to go out, and I know there's radio ads against me and so on and so forth, that's just nonsense. It's not true. Let's talk about our records, and let's put all this other stuff out there that's untruths aside. The problem is the city council didn't listen, okay, as they haven't done over the last 2 years. They're putting a building on the site of the YMCA parking lot that's going to cause a lot of problems for the YMCA, because a lot of people, seniors, young people, use that parking lot every day. The second thing is they didn't listen to anybody about the design of it. Here you have historic, beautiful South Street, and you put a modern building into it, hire an architectural firm out of Brooklyn. We have hundreds of architectural firms in this area to hire. But for every problem, there's got to be a solution. So what people have said to me, well, what would you do? I would encourage or try to move the building to put it on our water. Our riverfront that we have going through the city. Every city showcases their waterfront. And by putting a building on the waterfront, we can encourage other businesses to develop restaurants along the riverfront in downtown Auburn. Probably the greatest thing that we could invest in. But this is a prime example of a city council that makes decisions behind closed doors and go out and all vote in unison to say this is where it's going to be. Very little discussion from the public, unfortunately. I saw them, they had a public discussion on one night and they were doing core samples, drilling for core samples on the next day. But, you know, my opponents say that they want progress downtown. We all do. But to put peril upon the YMCA, who brings hundreds of people into downtown Auburn every day, who spend money and add to our economy, is just, it's a very, very poor decision and very disappointing that our elected officials would look at doing something like this. So this is a huge issue that separates myself and from Councilor McCormick and Councilor Cuddy. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cuddy, you get 1 minute for a response.
I just want to respond to my opponents. First off, that property is owned by the city. There are several places that I'm sure people would say like are ideal, but that we have location that the city owns that had the footprint to build a welcome center. 2, we have listened to the public and we have provided alternative parking and we're going to change the roads so that they actually, it's easier to park, it's easier to walk, it is going to be pedestrian friendly. So any assertion that it's going to change the YMCA or it's going to hurt the YMCA is false. So what I'm saying is that the council and the city of Auburn has been very responsive to the public. We have made several adjustments to the plan based on public input, and any other assertion is just false.
Mr. Camardo gets 1 minute, then Councilor McCormick.
Once again, unfortunately, we're not listening to the public because people don't want to park on Court Street or park in the parking garage. They want to park in a lot that's well lit. I know my wife talks about this all the time. She drops off my son at the YMCA. She likes to park in a parking lot that's well lit. It's visible. It's not off Court Street where it's on a back street. So it's a perfect situation how the city council did not listen to people, have public opinions to come into to make this decision differently, because we do own the loop road next to the outlet. And that could have been a perfect site for it. So I'm not talking about going out and buying new additional lands. We do have other spots that we could put this welcoming center on. But unfortunately, once again, the decision was made behind closed doors, and the council decided to put it there and put great peril upon the YMCA, and that brings hundreds of people into downtown Auburn every day. So I guess our actions speak louder than our voices, but this is what's got to happen. Unfortunately, we got to have a city council that's listening to you. Thank you.
Councilor McCormick, you have 1 minute on this.
Thank you. Our actions do speak louder than our words in a lot of cases. It's something about the Camardo family and development in downtown that just doesn't work. 4 or 5 years ago when State Street, 1-7 State Street, we had property there. We were very excited to bring a musical theater festival to downtown Auburn. I believe it was a Camardo family that was against it. And I think we were sued 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. 7 times there was a lawsuit brought against the city, the college. It's to prevent us from doing that. And right now we have an empty spot there. And now he's promoting the fact that we have a parking lot that we'd like to make into a visitor center instead of a parking lot. And that's a problem too. I just don't know if we can count on any development or progress under the Camardo family.
Mr. Miller?
It's been brought up twice now that the city owned the property, so they wanted to build on it. Just because the city owns the property doesn't mean that the people don't have a say in what goes there. It's still their city. As I mentioned in the last debate, it's not up to the city council to dictate to the city what goes on what property. It's still up to the citizens to make that decision, and it's the role of the city council to simply make sure that whatever is built there or whatever is developed there is done legally to avoid the lawsuit. So it's fine that those properties are owned by the city, but it's still the citizens that should decide what goes there.
All right, you have 1 minute if you want
Oh,
to
I do.
respond.
Unfortunately, Ms. McCormick wants to bring up this mudslinging once again. You know, I want to talk about the facts. She brings Camardo's into it. Joe is involved in the lawsuit. I'm John. I want to just ask Ms. McCormick one thing. She said there was nothing wrong with the site on State Street, and now she's going to go ahead and spend $220,000 to figure out what's on the site. So it's either this way or that way. But as I stated before, folks, let's put the mudslinging aside. Let's talk about issues, and let's talk about records. Unfortunately, my opponents don't want to talk about their records because they have a record of tax and spend and bringing more fees and chasing people out of the city. But let's talk about positive things that can happen for this community, how we can bring people into the community. I'm invested in downtown Auburn. I put my money where my mouth is more than anybody here on this table. It's great to see progress in downtown. We all want to see progress in downtown, but we want to see the right progress in downtown. And we're not here to look at any special interest group or trying to pander to any one group. We want to make sure that everybody's involved in the process throughout the whole city. So thank you.
Two things. One is we will go an extra minute when individuals' names are brought up, but this is the last round. So Mr. Cuddy, if you have 1 minute, and the only person who gets to ask the questions is Mr. Boyer. So we'll put that out there. Mr. Cuddy, you get 1 minute.
Okay. So this Welcome Center didn't just pop out of anywhere. It was part of the Historical and Cultural Sites Committee, part of their mission plan when it first started. You know, this is the thing that I referred to in the very beginning. Like Auburn, early on, 20 years ago, realized that we needed to do something because of our manufacturing past has diminished. So we needed to respond to an industry that was beginning to boom, and tourism is that industry. So in the very beginning, a Welcome Center was seen as something that we needed to do, and having the Harriet Tubman National Park as a reality coming to Auburn, the city and the state needed to respond, and this Welcome Center is a manifestation of years of hard work. And so it's finally here, and I'm very proud of it, and it will help the city, and we don't need anything blocking it.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to let you know what we're doing here. You are watching the City Council Forum for 2017. The election is on November 7th. We have all 4 candidates who are running for office. We have incumbent Terry Cuddy, who is on the Democratic Working Families Party and Auburn First Party. We have John Camardo, who is on the Republican, Conservative and Independence line. Adam Miller, who is on the Republican and Independence Party line. And incumbent Debby McCormick, who is on the Democratic Working Families Party and Auburn First Party. I hope I have all of those parties right. They are all being asked questions from Mr. Boyer. Mr. Boyer.
Okay, let's move on to public safety. It's a huge part of the city's budget. When you factor or combine the budgets for the fire department and the police department, and it's also been the subject of some big budget battles over the years as far as the number of positions and the amount of money on overtime and other things like that. So a simple question for all 4 candidates. I know you're like those kind.
They're my favorites.
Not sure where we start, but you can figure that out.
Mr. Camardo is up first. And
All
right. Go back
So
to the routine.
the simple question is, are police and fire staffing levels at the right place right now? If not, do we need to add more? Do we need to have less in one department or the other?
Mr. Camardo, you have 2 minutes.
Folks, public safety is very important in the city. I know that I've heard many times, and I've supported this on my tenure on the council. When people pick up the phone call, they have an emergency, they want somebody to respond. So I am fully supportive of public safety. My last budget year at the city, I tried to add 2 additional police officers to the Auburn Police Department. My opponents, Councilor Cuddy and Councilor Cuddy, voted against that, unfortunately. When I was on the city council, I voted against the layoffs. I knew it was going to cost the city a lot of money. I understand contracts, and I knew the contractual obligations that the city had to the fire department. So I voted against that. I was one of the only ones to vote against the city budget that included the layoffs in the fire department. I believe that even Mayor Quill voted for that budget. So I've supported public safety over my tenure on the council. I will continue to support it. I think it's important. I've heard from people that want to make sure, like I say, when there's an emergency, they have the resources to look out to the city to make sure somebody's responding. That's why they pay their taxes, because they want public safety there. But more than ever, we need more police officers, something that my opponents voted against, because we are facing a terrible situation with the heroin epidemic now, and we need more police officers out there to take this poison off the streets so it stops affecting so many families. So I'm very supportive of public safety, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, right level for fire and police?
I'd have to go. I think we have the right level right now. I think it's the safety of the city is of great concern and should be one that's monitored. As far as moving on in the future, like any city, demographics change, crime rates change, things change, and those things need to be adjusted for. We can look into those adjustment levels in the future from time to time, but I think right now we have, as was mentioned, we do have the heroin epidemic, the drug and opioid epidemic that we need to try to control, and our police officers are our first line of defense in that, and the training that they've received and the time that they spend out there managing these situations has been a great help. So I think we do have the right levels right now, and adjustments can be made in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Councilor McCormick on the issue of right levels for police and fire.
Thank you. When I took office, when Councilor Cuddy and I took office, our public safety, police and fire, I would say they were broken as well. We had laid off 10 firefighters, and we had hired a police chief that was not quite up to what the job required as far as a small city and a police department. Mismanagement is the word I would use for the police department. We wouldn't want to add more staff to a police department that was already being dismantled, I guess is the best word I can think of. Our predecessors didn't have a problem with public safety being dismantled when the police chief disbanded the emergency response team. He let the Finger Lakes Drug Task Force just flounder, and was getting ready to dismantle our school's resource officer program. These are three critical things to keeping the city safe, to addressing the heroin drug program. These are things that, when we got in office, we rehired the fire department, the fire officers, firemen, women, and we took care of the things that needed to be done at the police department. And we now have the emergency response team, the SROs are in place, and the Finger Lakes Drug Task Force is back. They're back together, and things are going great. Training is up to where it should be. Everybody's being trained. We need a well-trained on both fire and police, and they're getting the training they need. Of course, we could always use more police, but I think what we've got right now, they're working well together, and we have the support, and they work well with the Sheriff's Department and the state police. So I think we're okay.
Thank you. Councilor Cuddy.
I'd like to echo Councilor McCormick's sentiment. When we started, they let go of crossing guard positions. The SROs were in peril. The emergency response team was being disbanded, and the Finger Lakes Drugs Task Force, Auburn was not participating. She also alluded to the 10 firefighter positions that were lost. Mr. Camardo mentioned that he did not support the cut of the firefighter positions. But I would imagine that if he felt very strongly about something like that, like public safety, that he would lobby his fellow counselors to do the right thing. That's what I do on the Auburn City Council. You know, we don't always agree, but I'll make phone calls to Councilor Giannatino. I'll make a phone call to Councilor McCormick and Councilor Carbajal, and I'll make a phone call to Mayor Quill when it's something I really believe in. And public safety is something I really believe in. Water quality is something I really believe in. And that is how you actually follow through on something. You lobby, you work with your councilors to do the right thing. And when Councilor McCormick and I were elected and we were in office, we fixed the problems that were there. We hired the 4 firefighters back, and we reinstituted the crossing guards. So that is why we are supported by both the firefighters and the police department.
Thank you. You have
All
1
set?
minute, Mr.
Yes,
Camardo.
please. I'd just like to set the record straight, because in no way, manner was the SROs ever in jeopardy. This is another myth that my opponents put out there to try to cloud the record, unfortunately. But I tried to work with you, Councilor Cuddy, you and Councilor McCormick, on hiring more police officers, but unfortunately that didn't happen. I tried to work with my fellow colleagues to not lay off the firemen. I thought that was the right thing to do. But once again, we got to make sure as city councilors that we're doing the right thing. We're providing the services of the taxpayers expect and deserve, and that's probably the major thing, is that we carry out our fiduciary responsibilities to you, the voters of the area, by making sure we're spending your money as it was our own. And unfortunately, when you have to look at a lot of these issues, you got to make sure you're doing your job and doing what's right for the constituents of the people of Auburn, and not making deals in the back room of City Hall, and just come out and make these decisions without any input from anybody. And that's an unfortunate situation that's happened over the last 2 years. And that needs to change next week. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camardo.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Boyer.
Okay. Kind of lump a couple issues together to try to get through some topics. On the city manager, we went through a search process this year, resulting in the hiring of Jeff Dygert, the former fire chief, into that position. So in sort of a two-part question, if you can, A, critique the process that led to that decision to promote from within, and then B, evaluate how Mr. Dygert's doing in that job.
Mr. Miller, you get the question for the first time. It only took us an hour to get here, so you can start us off on the city manager.
Sure. I think the process that the city went through of searching for the right candidate for that position was the right way to go. Unfortunately, I think we may have skipped over a few people that may have been more qualified for the position. But as far as Mr. Dygert goes, he's no stranger to having to present things to City Hall in his role as fire chief or former fire chief, so he understands some of the ins and outs of the city council and the meetings and the responsibilities in that way, so he was no stranger to that. As far as in his new role as city manager, I know I've had some issues myself that I've had to have things dealt with, and he's been a great help to me in those situations. I think he is doing a good job in that position. I know the city has sent him for different training things. I think he's learned a lot. I think he's doing a good job. As far as specifically updating City Hall with the right software, computer software and things, he's been able to make a change in that way, I know. So I think he is doing a fine job in that role, and he's been a help to me personally, so I can't say anything bad about him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Councilor McCormick, on the process used for this manager, and how is Mr. Dygert doing?
The process I think, would be a typical process. We put the ad out, or the request. I think we had over 30 resumes from across the country. We reviewed them, we went through and narrowed them down, and we were interviewing. And meanwhile, Jeff Dygert was appointed as interim city manager. And while we had 5 candidates that we were looking at, he was doing a great job. Things were getting done. He was managing things that usually would take, a lot more work and effort. The leadership qualities that he had were exactly what we needed. So that's how we brought it up to him. He thought it over, and And fortunately, I think fortunately for the city, he agreed. And I think if anybody knows a fireman, leaving the fire department wasn't easily done, because that's, I think, where their heart and soul is. But he's doing a fabulous job. He's communicating constantly with city council. He always thinks of things ahead of time. He's planning ahead. He's managing the different staff. He's had to face some crisis things. I think he's a great leader, and I think the staff is working well with him. The community, he's responsive. I just think he's doing a good job, and it was great and a good fortune that we have him.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Mr. Cuddy.
So when the city manager, Doug Selby, retired, we had a very difficult task ahead of us. We had 50 candidates mail in their resumes. We've conducted 12 interviews, narrowed it down to 5 for a second round. And as Councilor McCormick said in her statement, that all in that time, the city manager, Doug Selby, had suggested that Jeff Dygert serve as the interim city manager. And I was really impressed once Jeff Dygert was in that position. He had to deal not only with being an interim city manager, but there were a lot of things that he had to prove himself on. We didn't have a director of municipal utilities because the director of municipal utilities retired around the same time. So we had to, that was a crisis that he had to work through. There was still fallout from the cogen, the failed energy project that was kept alive by the previous council. We were still losing, $300,000 to $250,000 because of the proprietary equipment needed. So we had to really tie up that loose end. And then shortly after he was sworn in, we had the microcystin blue-green algae issue. So he has proven himself in times in critical times. And I really think that, what I see is we need to reward talent. And much like, and Jeff Dygert is a very talented city manager, and we're very lucky to have him.
Thank you. Councilor, Mr. Camardo, on the issue of process.
The charter of the City of Auburn talks about the City Council sets policy, and it's the city manager's responsibility to carry that policy out. Unfortunately, when I left city government, I had a great working relationship with Mr. Selby. I didn't see any problems, but I understood that the current City Council really had some problems with him, and that was probably why he left, unfortunately. So the city goes ahead and advertises for a city manager with a master's in public administration. Get roughly 40 applicants. I don't ever know what happened to the process. It was just all of a sudden come out behind closed doors once again, and they're going to promote somebody from within. I know that position, working with the city manager for many years, not only my tenure on the Civil Service Commission, but as a city councilor. You have to have a vast knowledge in engineering, personnel, budgetary responsibility, water. So there's takes a lot of experience to come to that position. I worked with Mr. Dygert for many years on the fire department. He's a very competent individual. I don't think it would be unfair for me to comment on Mr. Dygert's performance because I haven't worked with him side by side. But I really think the council dropped the ball by not having more public opinion and having the community voice their opinion on who they would like to see as city manager. I hope we have an opportunity to talk about the cogeneration plant that the councilors have brought up many times, because they've yet to talk about the probably over $500,000 that plant is not generating to the general fund now, and I really like to know where they're getting the money from to offset those losses, not only in the general fund, but in the landfill account. So I hope we get an opportunity to talk about it, but the city manager's position is a very important position. It's the leader of the city. It's a person that carries out the policy of the city council, and unfortunately, there was decisions to be made behind closed doors. Once again, it's another decision that was made without public input, so thank you.
Mr. Cuddy, you'll have 1 minute on this.
I have a different interpretation of Mr. Selby leaving because obviously Mr. Camardo has his own interpretation. I really feel that Mr. Selby has served the city very well, and he served the city in very tumultuous times, and that took a lot for Mr. Selby to do, and I think working in a council that was broken and had a very adversarial relationship to the city staff, I think it put a lot of a stress on Mr. Selby. So if Mr. Camardo is going to make an interpretation, I'm going to make an interpretation too. My interpretation is this: once Councilor Carbajal and Councilor Giantino were elected, he knew that the city was going to be in good hands, and he put Jeff Dygert as the interim city manager. And we saw a good thing, like Doug Selby saw a good thing, and we hired him.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor McCormick, you'll have 1 minute as well.
Thank you. I don't know how Councilor Camardo, or Mr. Camardo, would know why Doug Selby left. I don't understand how he could assume there was a problem unless Mr. Selby had shared that with him, which I highly doubt. We know, and there's certain things that you do have behind closed doors because they're personnel issues. We wouldn't want to have city staff out talking about personnel issues in a public meeting. Mr. Selby left for whatever reason. We got along great with Mr. Selby. If anybody ever wondered what happened before, my question would be, why do you think he never was able to put down roots in Auburn? That would be a good question to ask.
Mr. Camardo, you'll have 1 minute.
Yes, I saw firsthand the interaction between the councilors and Mr. Selby, and so I would leave that there, but I'm not going to get into issues that we talked about behind closed doors, but I saw the interaction, and it wasn't a respectful interaction, unfortunately. But all this stuff about not having respect for staff, I've had the utmost respect for every staff member across the board. I worked well with them during my tenure at City Hall, and it showed very well during the meetings that we had. We had very respectful discussions. So once again, throwing all this mud out there to try to get something against somebody is just unfair. Let's talk about records. Let's talk about what we've done for the city. I'm very proud of all the decisions I made. Tried to take the city out of bankruptcy, help take the city out of bankruptcy, actually put the city in good financial shape, as was talked about by the auditor the other day, because when you do put policy in effect, it takes a little time for that policy to actually come through. So I feel very confident and very proud of my record over the last 4 years when I was on council, and I feel very proud of the ability and the experience I'm going to be able to bring to council if you so chose to pick me next week. So thank you.
We'll allow 1 minute again. Mr. Cuddy.
What Councilor Camardo calls mud, I call the record. And to take credit for the hard work that the current council has done, I find it disingenuous. I mean, the cogen, which you referred to saying that it made money, it has never, ever made money. And I would challenge anyone to look into any time that has made money. It has lost money. I've been quoting, it's the gift that kept on taking until Councilor McCormick, myself, and the current city council closed it down. And it was one of the greatest moments on city council is when I closed that cogen down, when we closed that cogen down.
Okay, Mr. Camardo, you'll have 1 minute.
Unfortunately, Mr. Cuddy doesn't have a good idea of what the repercussions of closing that plant down. When I was on council, we stabilized the losses, and the cogen plant was just making some money, but it was at a substantial amount where it stabilized itself, because unfortunately, he doesn't understand the ins and takes of the budget. The cogen facility was paying the landfill account for methane, something that kept it running. So we lost the amounts of money that were paid to the landfill account, but we lost administrative fees that were being charged to that account. So all these things have repercussions upon the general fund. That's why it was a bad decision that may be made. It should have been well thought out, but unfortunately, when you have challenges to this council, they take the easy way out and either raise taxes or shut things down instead of taking a step back and spending the time to really analyzing the problems that are facing you to do what's right for the city for the long-term effect.
Okay, Councilor McCormick, you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. If I'm almost flabbergasted. If shutting down a project that was costing the city taxpayers millions of dollars, if shutting it down was the easy way out, okay, then we took the easy way out. I think that to keep it open would have been irresponsible. It would have been fiscal malpractice. It was to begin with, actually. The fact that it's shut down is only keeping it from costing us more money. We're still going to pay for it until 2034, I think. So I think just cutting our losses as soon as we could is the best thing for the city taxpayers.
Okay. Mr. Boyer, I think you have one last question.
One last one. All right. Well, we'll do it in a typically unconventional way for today's debate.
Great.
So I'm going to ask a question to the two Republican candidates,
Okay.
ask them to answer it. Sorry, you guys can't chime in. Then I'm going to ask you guys a question. So for the Republican candidates, I know you guys have campaigned here on a message of lowering taxes and lower fees, sewer rates, and stuff like that. At the same time, you've also talked about more police, more investments in roads. You'd mentioned today, Mr. Camardo, building a pipeline from Groton to Auburn. So how, the bottom line is, how do you balance the budget with that kind of investing in new things, but also saying you're going to cut taxes, cut the revenue sources? So can you offer specific cuts that are out there to be had in order to make this budget balance with the campaign promises you're making?
Number one, I wouldn't have closed the cogeneration plant. The cogeneration plant was something that we all inherited. It was a bad decision right from the beginning. But when you have a general fund that still has millions of dollars to pay off in debt on that, I wouldn't have done that. We probably have lost $600,000 to $700,000 in revenue, unfortunately, in that area. But when I first came on council, I took the time and I recommended over the last 2 years that we go to zero-based budgeting throughout the budget. We make sure that we're just not allowing our department heads to come in and say we're going to add 10% to the budget and go from there. But we actually analyze where we can spend money more efficiently and effectively. And I understand things go up every year, but the city's taking in a lot of money now. It's unfortunate that they have to keep raising your taxes all the time. And it was reported the other day that there was about $14 million in the fund balance. The question I have is, when you look at the fund balance, what's restricted fund balance, what's fund balance that's readily available? If there's $14 million in the fund balance, then why aren't we fixing our streets? Why aren't we balancing the budget? Why aren't we giving the tax break to the taxpayers out there all the time, because we have such a healthy fund balance? The New York State Controller recommends that we have between 5 and 10% of our budget in fund balance, which would leave about $3 million that we should have in our fund balance. So that means we got $11 million in our fund balance. So when you look at things like this, when you take the time to analyze, as I did when I was on council, the budget, and I know I was criticized by my opponents, and even the city manager and the controller didn't agree with me, but when it came time to raise fees in the water fund, I says, no, that doesn't seem right to me. We've got plenty of money in the water fund. Well, they kept arguing with me that I didn't know what I was talking about, and yes, there was over $1 million in the water fund. So we're able to stop any increases at the time, unfortunately, because I took the time to study the budget to make sure the monies were spent accordingly and the monies were in the right accounts. That's something
Thank
that
you,
needs
Mr.
to
Camardo.
happen before we can just go ahead and say we're going to raise taxes and fees.
Mr. Miller?
As far as cutting the taxes and the spending we have to go through our budget. We have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. We have to examine where all of our money is going to. Right now, we don't see where that money is going to. It's one of the things that I've talked to a number of people. They keep raising our taxes, raising the fees and the reassessments and things like that, but we're not seeing the difference in the city. We still can't drive down the road in a straight line, and we're still questioning the quality of our drinking water. If we saw some noticeable changes in the city, that would be one thing, but we're not. So we need to see where that money is going to. We also need to prioritize the projects that we're working on in the city. There's a lot of great ideas that have been presented over the last couple of years by the City Council, but we need to prioritize them as what is a want and what is a need. And sometimes we need to put aside the things that we would want for the things that we do need. Again, we need to be listening to the voice of the people and determining these things, but we need to just take a step back and look at what the budget says and see like I said, what is a want, what is a need. We need to prioritize those projects. And I believe also working to bring jobs into the area would help to lower the taxes and fees that we're seeing. If we were to bring jobs into the area, bring people back to the city of Auburn, instead of pushing them out constantly, we could expand that tax base. We could then lower the taxes and ease the burden on those that are living here. So going through the budget, prioritizing projects, and bringing jobs to the area, I think are the way that we can get a handle of some of these high taxes and fees.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Boyer.
All right, my question for the two Democrats is, you guys are all Democrat right now on the City Council, and there are probably some voters out there that think we need at least one Republican on there, just as a check, as someone to say, hey, wait a minute, let's not go so fast. How do you respond to that voter who's thinking, I got to pick at least one Republican this year?
Is this for both, any particular order?
Both Democrat. You figured that one out.
Okay, Mr. Cuddy, you'll go first.
Okay. I find it interesting that tonight, Jeremy, you noted that Debbie and I differ on a specific part of the how we would deal with the long-term water issue, and even though we disagree, we respect each other, and I know that the Republican, the county chair, also characterized another one of my colleagues, Jimmy Giantino, as runaway counselors. So I don't think that the public should worry about us being all of one party. We're all very different. We all have very concerns. I don't think party really matters so much in local elections, but I will say that one thing that the five of us bring our expertise, and Dia is an academic. Jimmy comes from the business world. Debbie, years in banking, institutional knowledge of the city. Myself, I'm an activist and a teacher. And Mayor Quill is a great mayor with tons of experience and an excellent representative of our city. So we come from very different backgrounds, and I think the public needs to know that all of us, have their best interests in mind.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Councilor McCormick, you get to give the last answer.
Oh boy. I understand people would think if it's all one party, they almost think alike, walk alike, but it's so not true. We do disagree on many things. We have a variety among the five of us. I would call it conservative, liberal, somewhere in between. We do not always agree. I think locally that it's common sense what the issues we have are. I don't think really there's the philosophy of Republican and Democrat. I think we have to do what's right for the city. No community these days has any extra funds to do things, as Mr. Miller said, the wants and the needs. We're just doing the needs and trying to get by on that. We apply for grants and things like that. But I think that the difference with this council, from what I have experienced when I was city clerk, is we treat people, whether it's each other, staff, anyone that walks in the building or we meet on the street, with respect. We listen to people. We don't bully people. Those are the kind of things I think that set us apart. I think the city staff is recovering from years of bullying and intimidation. I think we've been lucky that they've stuck it out and hung in there. We've got some great talented people at City Hall, and they're probably Democrats and Republicans too, but we're all working hard and dedicated to doing what's right for the city.
Thank you. Thank you all four of you. We're going to finish off with our closing statements. You all have 2 minutes each. We said we would go in reverse order. So we'll hear from Debby McCormick first, who's on the Democratic Working Families Party and Auburn First Party.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm proud of where Auburn is today and in the direction that we are headed. Auburn's future looks brighter than ever, and I mean it. We are fortunate that some of America's greatest heroes and legends chose to live in Auburn, New York. Our central location, our culture, natural resources, and the people make Auburn a tourism destination that attracts visitors from around the world. What we do tomorrow in this community, with the opportunities and resources we have today, such as the Harriet Tubman National Park and the Equal Rights Heritage Tourism Center, will determine Auburn's future. Will we create a quality of life that keeps people living here and draws new families and businesses to Auburn? Will we tackle the plague of abandoned and vacant property that has hit almost every neighborhood? Will we take the steps needed to protect our lake and our environment? The answers to these questions should be yes, and they will be with my experience and leadership. On November 7th, it's your opportunity to shape Auburn's future. City of Auburn voters have a choice to make, and I am asking for your vote on Election Day.
Thank you, Councilor. We'll now hear from Adam Miller, who's on the Republican and Independence Party lines. Mr. Miller.
As I said before, I love Auburn, and I speak passionately in all of these debates. I've spoken from the heart on these issues. I don't claim to have the solution to every single problem that the city has, but I'm willing to step up and try to make a difference in where I see that we have a problem. I'm willing to work with those that are in City Hall, regardless of the letters that they have after their name with political party or affiliation, because I don't want to put those things first. I'm trying to push an agenda of the people, a voice for the people. That is the utmost concern that I have seen and that I've heard, and even in my own personal life. We do have a lot of great history in our town, and I'm proud of the history that we have, the notable people and the inventions and technologies that we've been able to develop. But we need to look forward. We need to look into the future and see what kind of legacy we're leaving for the next generation. And right now, it's not a very good one. We need to take a different direction. I'm all for tourism. It's a good thing, and it's very helpful to a small community, but we need to be a voice for the people who live here. We need to take care of those who live here before we reach out to bring complete strangers here for a short visit. I may be the underdog. I may be the candidate that nobody knows, but I'm going to try my best to be the voice for the people, and I think that I can accurately be that voice because I am an average Auburnian. I live paycheck to paycheck, and I'm listening to those that are out there working every single day. With your help, next week on November 7th, I will be proud to serve you as City Councilor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. We'll now hear from John Camardo, who's on the Republican, Conservative, and Independence lines. Mr. Camardo.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'm sure you saw the quite large differences between my opponents and myself. I usually don't refer to props or notes or anything, but I'd really like you to look at your tax bill before next Tuesday. It's a very important document that you should be looking at and seeing the rise in taxes over the last 2 years, and especially the trash tax that my opponents were the authors of. We've got to stop these. We've got to look for better ways of doing things. I also want you to look at your water bill. And my opponents were pushing for a $25 surcharge on the water bill and the increased burden that puts on our families in this community. And I know as you struggle to have your household incomes meet every month, that's something that the City Council should be looking at too, and not just trying to give the bill to the taxpayers because they can't find alternate solutions to problems that exist out there. But tomorrow is going to be a brighter day, the day after election, when we bring a voice back to City Hall, because I think it's important that your voice is heard and that you're heard. It's important that we start looking at job creation and expanding the tax base, that we start bringing the progress that we've seen downtown into all the neighborhoods throughout the city. I want to encourage our young people to come back to Auburn. I want to encourage our future to be bright here. We have great assets in this community. We have a college that's probably one of our greatest assets. We have a hospital, it's a great asset. But we need to support these assets through people living here and paying taxes and enjoying the quality of life that we have to offer. So Tuesday's a very important day, whether we take a step forward or a step backward. And I hope with your help and consideration, you will vote for me on November the 7th, and we can take a step forward into building a brighter and better future for Auburn. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Camardo. We'll finally hear from Terry Cuddy, who's the incumbent. He's on the Democratic Working Families Party and Auburn First Party. Counselor?
My platform is pretty clear. I have a proven track record of accomplishments over the last 4 years. We ended an era of irresponsible spending and staff cuts that almost spiraled our city into a financial crisis. Now our fiscal house is in order, and we are in a position to improve the core services that the city provides its citizens. I will continue to respond to the needs of our citizens and advocate on their behalf, whether it be for clean drinking water or for our ability to address zombie and vacant properties. The negativity that used to permeate and disrupt city progress has vanished, and there is a renewed belief that we can overcome obstacles if we work together. We are not only making Auburn a destination for tourists, but also for young families and professionals. I personally know several young people who've moved to here that recognize how great Auburn City is. There's a lot to do over the next 4 years. What is needed is consistent, steady, and thoughtful governing. We need leaders who have developed trust with the public, especially in times of uncertainty. That leadership will come from Councilor Debby, McCormick, and myself. And we ask for your vote on November 7th. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Jeremy, and Cuddy Community College and the Citizen for hosting this televised debate. Thank you, voters, for being engaged on the issues to make the right choice for the future of Auburn.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you all for running. We know it's not always easy out there for you or your families. We wish you well in the next week. We also want to thank Mr. Boyer, who has done a wonderful job these last 5 forums, as usual. And thank you for representing the Citizen as their executive editor. Thank him for here, and also thank Mr. Elkins, who's been our timekeeper and kept us all online. So we also want to thank all of you for tuning in and encourage you to go vote on November 7th. We're going to take next week off. We will return in 2 weeks with Senator. We'll have several shows for both Inside Government and Beyond the Front Page. Among our guests are Senator John DeFrancisco, Auburn Superintendent of Schools Jeff Perazzola, and Business Manager Lisa Green, as well as shows focused on this college with President Brian Durant, and shows on Hospice of the Finger Lakes, which turns 30, as well as an update on the Shines Theater. Because of the number of forums that have been produced this year, if you have not been able to watch them live on television, you can go to auburnpub.com or the college's YouTube station and watch them again. The Auburn Regional Media Access, ARMA, will also run these forums on Spectrum channels 12 and 98 and FiOS 31, as well as they will be played on Win 89, the college's radio station, starting at 10 a.m. this weekend. As always, we would like to get your questions and thoughts. You can send them to us at cozguytho@aol.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuddy Community College. I want to thank you for watching. We hope you have a good night, have a great tomorrow, and do remember to go vote on November 7th.